question.
Yeah.
Pronunciation, is it of our leaders in work and organizations division? I know Giselle Timmerman, Gregory Hennessy. Is it Mega? How do you say her first name? I just want to get it right.
Megana.
Megana Rao?
Yeah, but she always goes by Meg.
Should I call her Meg then?
Yeah, you could just call her Meg Rao.
Yeah, that's what I call her too.
Now,
Okay.
Fred, they actually brought you to us, and I'm so grateful that our work and org division is amazing, and they're very active, and they recognized your work and obviously wanted to work with you. Have you made further plans to work with the division?
Well, sure. I mean, we've got so many common friends and common
Right.
colleagues that I'm right in there with them.
I'm really excited by that. I know they have a newsletter, which their newsletter is stronger.
It was awesome.
Yeah, so I really look forward to seeing how you work together with that group.
Yeah, no, I plan on it.
Oh, how wonderful.
All right, it just hit the top of the hour.
Yeah.
Yes. So Fred, Jenny and I are gonna mute ourselves. I have your cell phone number in case we need to get in touch, but everything should go smoothly. And we're gonna start the broadcast. You'll hear that the broadcast is starting. David's gonna launch, and then we'll do that transition. And then I'll end the webinar
I'll
at
see
the end.
this IPDA on my screen while David's talking, and then he'll go to my screen.
Yes, so I'll go through the slides, and then you're gonna see that pop up like we practiced.
And that's going to happen when I'm introducing you. I'm going to introduce you, Fred, with some nice things, and when that's happening, you guys will be able to work through the transition.
Right.
Okay. Awesome.
All right, here we go. Have fun.
Have fun.
Thanks.
Enjoy. Thanks, Fred.
Thanks.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to all the members of the International Positive Psychology Association. This is David Paulet, your host and founder of the Positive Psychology Leaders Series. We're sure glad to have you today. It's the actual 32nd edition. We're checking the records, but we think we're the longest running positive psychology series in the world. This is where, if you're joining us for the first time, this is where members get a chance to listen in on live presentations from the top positive psychology experts in the world. You get to hear interviews, presentations, and question and answer sessions with those same leaders. It's a real treat. It's a chance to get up front and close with real great people from around the world. Our most recent speakers are Barbara Fredrickson, who is our president of the association and positive psychology guru, and I use that with a smile, of course. We don't refer to ourselves as gurus, but she, with positivity and everything she's done with the broad and build theory, really awesome. A great presentation. It's in our archives. And Barry Schwartz just did a presentation on why we work. And boy, that was a great presentation and a real good setup for today's presentation as well. So if you haven't been in our archives lately, jump in. There are presentations dating all the way back to our inaugural presentation with Martin Seligman. Really great history inside of that. And yes, if you're taking notes today, you can write as fast as you want, but this presentation will also be in the archives. So no, as they say, no sweat, no perspiration. You'll get it easily after the presentation. Wanted to share with you too, next up in the series, we've got some real great presenters as well. We always do. Chiara Ruini from the University of Bologna is going to be presenting on clinical applications of positive psychology. She's terrific, and I'm looking forward to hearing her, and of course her accent will be, she of course would say I have an accent, but I'd love to hear hers on the call as well. Angela Duckworth will be coming off a book tour, launching her book, and highly anticipated book on grit. She'll be presenting on the subject, and we're looking forward to that as well. So it's going to be great. I do want to say right at the beginning, our work and organizational division has done some great work. Their newsletter right now is being put together, and if you have anything to contribute to it, go to the website. You'll find out more information, but it's really a great newsletter, and they're doing a great job. They're also looking for volunteer leaders, so if you're looking for any experience in leadership development in the field, the Work and Organization Division has some opportunities and some real good ones. I also want to thank the Work and Organizations Division for helping facilitate our invitation to our esteemed presenter today. I want to recognize our division president, Meg Rao, just doing a super job getting this division launched. Giselle Timmerman, who I actually studied with at the University of Pennsylvania. We were in the same cohort. She's awesome. As our division president-elect, so we're in good hands for many years. And Gregory Hennessy, our division secretary. So thank you for their good work, and again, helping facilitate today's presentation. So without further ado, there's a term used to describe this gentleman. There are lots of them. They're all good ones. But one of them is practitioner scientist, a real researcher, cutting edge researcher, seminal researcher, but also knows how to get inside corporations, organizations, and put it into practice. This is Dr. Fred Luthans, and let me tell you a little bit about him. He has his bachelor's degree from the University of Iowa in mathematics, an MBA, and a PhD in management and social psychology. Did a lot of work to get him started academically, that's for sure. He is, and I should say, because he put it in because I've seen it, that the year that he received his PhD was the year I started my career as a baby. So that's my little joke there. He served in the U.S. Army, taught psychology and leadership at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. He's been at the Department of Management at the University of Nebraska, an esteemed professor. I think I counted in one place 13 very prestigious awards he received, one of them being the 1986, the Academy of Management elected him as their president. One of the management scholars, really one of the first to apply behavioral science to better understanding and effectively managing human behavior in organizations. His book, Organizational Behavior, set the foundation for the field. It's in its, check this out, 13th printing. For anyone who's written a book, one printing is awesome. 13 is a real big deal. He's also known for actually coining the term positive organizational behavior. So if you didn't know that, that's a fun fact to know and tell at gatherings in positive psychology. His second book, Organizational Behavior Modification, was also a classic. I just have to say this, his Academy of Management and Learning and Educational Journal placed his research among the highest rated, I think in the top 8 highest rated in terms of importance, scientific validity, and practical usefulness. He had a great book out called Real Managers, answering the question about what effective managers do. He is going to be talking International Management, another book, now in its 7th printing, so he's got a lot of books in print. The 4th book, Psychological Capital, we're going to talk about that today, so I won't say much about that. But we're thrilled. He's just got some great background, and what I need to say, and I'll introduce him without further delay, and that is to say, one thing, it's not a prerequisite of being a leader in positive psychology, but sure is great. I met him, oh boy, maybe 10, 12 years ago at a conference among many other people, and he was one of the nicest guys, very accessible, interested in everybody. And so without further delay, let me introduce you to Dr. Fred Luthans. Welcome, Fred.
Well, thank you, David. That's quite an introduction. I mean that. I appreciate that. And of course, I'm not sure my wife would agree with all those nice things, but anyway, it was great to hear them, and I appreciate it, especially as I grow older here.
My pleasure.
So I'm going to, launch into this, if that's all right.
Please, yeah, dive right in. I'm going to be like everybody else, taking notes.
Well, welcome to all the participants on this today, and of course, if you watch this later or listen to this later, welcome to listening as well. I hope I'll keep you awake. I've want to, just kind of show you some pictures of what David just talked about here with this first slide, and I'm pretty proud of the fact that I was a track athlete, a hurdler at the University of Iowa. So that was my days when I was much thinner, and I loved being part of the sport world and actually getting involved in that more and more all the time. Actually, I'm going to be presenting at the Harvard Medical School on the role that positive psychology, and specifically in psychological capital in particular, play in the world of athletes these days. So that's going to be a fun time for me. And then, of course, I'm also proud that I did serve in the U.S. Army as a captain, and was lucky enough, and I do mean that because all my cohorts were assigned to Vietnam, lucky enough to be assigned to West Point and teach leadership. So that was quite an experience for me, and always proud of that. And then I've been, of course, traveling the world. And as David mentioned, I do have an interest in international management. So all of you outside the U.S. here, just let it be known that I probably have visited your country, and I enjoy traveling to countries very much and continue to do so. And here I'm talking with the big company China Mobile. I'll mention that later, some of the work I've done there. And then, of course, as David said, I've been my whole academic career at the University of Nebraska here in Lincoln, where I've been now completed 48 years of service to thousands of students, and of course doing my research at a tier 1 research institution like Nebraska. So I've been very blessed to have a great career, and I just wanted to kind of give you that in pictures a little bit. But the whole thing is, though, my family is the most important to me, and I can't pass up showing you this picture here. And you can see that nice background there. That's a lake in Nebraska. No, that's actually in the North Shore of Hawaii on our 50th wedding anniversary. That's my wife, Kay, in the middle there with me, and then our 4 children, their spouses, and our 8 grandchildren here. And each of these are by grouping. So my 2 sons, the big guy there, on the screen on the left there, he's also a professor at University of Nebraska at Kearney, and he and his brother, the one right next to me, are both professors, and they do also work in positive psychology applied to, they're taking mostly with the educational side of things and also the healthcare side of things. So it's a family enterprise, and our whole group there, pretty proud of those blondes. And then here's the crown jewel, though. He was not born yet when this particular picture was taken, but he's the youngest of our now 8 grandchildren, and he's quite a guy. So just had to show you that to give you at least where my priorities hopefully have always been and continue to be. Now, I want to start here at the beginning, though, by saying that I'm a research professor, and that means that I'm mostly into understanding and the effective application. And I'm not just a consultant nor a motivational speaker, but as David pointed out, I'm very proud of the fact that I like to think of myself as a scholar practitioner, not a practitioner scholar, but a scholar practitioner, because I am in the business school, and I've always been concerned about how does this apply to the workplace. So that's been my niche. That's what my passion has been. And I want to point out, though, that I'm not a motivational speaker, and you probably already guessed that by now. But hopefully, I've done enough of that I do feel that that's part of my bridging of the research to practice that we all should be concerned about, in at least my perspective. Now, as David said, I've got certain phases being at this for 50 years. And that starts with the whole field of organizational behavior. So this whole organizational behavior approach, which is more or less applied psychology, or in psychology departments is called, as most of you probably are, industrial organizational, or IO psychologists. But this whole field of organizational behavior, I was on the ground floor. Happened to be lucky enough to take my background that I had in my graduate training of both management and psychology and try to put those together at the beginning of this field called organizational behavior. Now, I don't claim to be the pioneer in there, but I do claim to be on the ground floor and one of the first to actually have a textbook in that area. And then, of course, I did take behaviorism to the workplace. So in my graduate training at the University of Iowa, which, by the way, was in the psychology side of that, was the same program that Albert Bandura went through at the University of Iowa. So, of course, he's, probably 10 years older than me, but he went through basically, and I had the same, professors that he had at the University of Iowa. So I feel that, that background I had really served me well throughout my career. But one of the things that it did was to take behaviorism, which I learned in my graduate program, to the workplace. it really hadn't been done before I did, and then came out with the book on that and the research to back it all up, in what I then coined the term organizational behavior modification. This more or less served as the model for then when I later did the same thing with taking positive psychology to the workplace. But most of the people who have been in the field a long time do know of my work in OB mod, as I called it, taking behaviorism to the workplace, and had some phenomenal results in terms of increasing performance through what? Positive reinforcement. So that kind of background served me well. And then to briefly mention some of the other approach that I have, simultaneously done on this whole notion of behavioral management to what do managers really do, and actually did observational and qualitative research early on in my career. So that resulted in a book that I called Real Managers. And then, of course, what we're talking about here today, this whole notion of positive organizational behavior, and then, of course, the derivative that I have called psychological capital. So that's what we're going to talk about today, but I do feel that I should give you a little bit of that background first. Now, David, of course, was kind enough to mention my books, and I'm not going to spend any time on it other than to say that I have felt always that not only to do the basic research in the top-tier journals, but also to have a book in that field or that stream that I was interested in. So that's what I did then with the whole field of organizational behavior, now in its 13th edition. Many printings, but we call those editions. So 13th edition, and I'm most proud of my last one because my two sons came on it with me. So now they're doing a lot of the legwork on keeping the editions up, but I felt that that was really, gratifying to me to have my two sons as the co-authors on that first textbook in organizational behavior. Then I did the OB mod book, as I told you, that came out in 1975, so it's been around a long time. And then, of course, that Real Managers book came out in the late 80s. And then, of course, now, the one that I'm really most proud of, and the one that we are, really feel that you need to look at if you're interested in this whole field of positive organizational behavior and psychological capital, is this Oxford University Press book that I co-authored with my former doctoral student and closest writing colleague, Carolyn Morgan Yusuf Morgan, who is just a wonderful, wonderful colleague that I've had through the years, along with all other doctoral students like James Avey, and then, of course, Bruce Avolio, who you all know in his transformational leadership and now authentic leadership that I've helped him on, but he's taken the lead on, and of course is one of the best known, if not the best known, scholar in the leadership field. So Bruce and I were colleagues here at Nebraska, and he, of course, is a co-author on this book, along with, of course, Carolyn Yusuf Morgan, who is just, again, a close friend and colleague who I do most of my writing with in this whole field of psychological capital. Now, I want to kind of show you pictorially how what I've been doing kind of merges with positive psychology in this picture here. And I like this picture because it's where I'm from. I'm from the Mississippi River in Clinton, Iowa. So this kind of looks like the Mississippi River. I'll have to admit, I don't think we have nice little waterfalls like that. But nevertheless, this looks like where I grew up on the banks of the Mississippi in Clinton, Iowa. And we had a cabin like right on a scene just like this. But the whole idea being that, I'm merging the whole field of positive psychology, which I was lucky enough to be on the ground floor of. Now, when I say lucky enough, I do mean that because being a member of the Gallup organization, when I was here in Lincoln, they actually started with when Selection Research Inc. bought the Gallup polling company back in the mid-'80s, and I was able to be then at the very first Positive Psychology Summit the year after Seligman gave his, of course, inaugural speech about the call for positive psychology in the field at his presidential address to the APA. So I was lucky enough to be in the audience at the very first summit held at Lincoln, Nebraska, not in Omaha, where Gallup now subsequently moved, and not to Washington, D.C., where some of the early summits, which I think David, of course, attended, on positive psychology, which now, of course, has become what you guys are all a member of, the IPPA, started in Lincoln, Nebraska, believe it or not, because that's where Selection Research Inc. was when they purchased Gallup, and then the founder of that, Don Clifton, who was doing strength-based consulting at the time, invited Seligman and his cohorts, Barb Fredrickson, who David mentioned, and others who are on this leadership series, all attended. Mike Csikszentmihalyi, Ed Diener, all the gurus, as he said, in positive psychology. I was there. And so when I'm listening to them in 1999, I say to myself, wow, this is great. And this was my epiphany. This was the light bulb going on in my head saying, but they're mostly taking it in the clinical applications and not to the workplace. So I decided right then and there, listening to these wonderful scholars of positive psychology and the pioneers of the field, in 1999, the year after Seligman gave the talk, I said to myself, I want to take this to the workplace, just as I had done with behaviorism. So I made the decision right then and there that I was going to get this out there, branded by calling it positive organizational behavior, and getting that into articles in the top journals in my field, Journal of Organizational Behavior and the Academy Management Executive, these articles to brand this approach of taking positive psychology to the workplace in what I call positive organizational behavior. And then that, of course, then became psychological capital, which then was branded in 2003, 2004 as PsyCap. And I've been going now strong ever since, especially then with the latest summary of all this research in the PsyCap book that I mentioned to you previously. Now, I want to make clear that, I'm in the field of management and organizational psychology and IO psychology, or what I call positive organizational behavior. And we've always had leaders, interested in taking a positive approach. They all have recognized the importance of happiness and positivity. No question about that. However, only up until recent times, only up until when positive psychology was integrated into this approach, have they felt that this was just too fuzzy, too many balloons, too many smile faces, and not really serious application. So I wanted to make sure that we did do serious application through the positive psychology, which of course was with Seligman, a research psychologist, with Barb Fredrickson, a research psychologist, with Ed Diener, a research psychologist, taking their research, taking their perspective, taking their whole approach to, wow, we have to have an evidence-based approach to positive organizational behavior. So that's what I really started out to do, and to convince then the real world, convince the organizational leaders that there is something to this. So drawing on, positive psychology research, and of course all the great stuff that was coming out on that and still continues to, is where, we can really give a credible foundation to what I've tried to develop in this positive OB approach. For example, positive psychology told me where it comes from. Where does our happiness come from? Where does our positivity come from? And more importantly, how to develop it. So, for example, and this is by way of, my best example, is the work of Sonia Lubomirsky. My goodness, we all have to, owe her a considerable debt, because she certainly has taken the positive psychology basic research and made it understandable. So I love her positivity circle, or her pie, which of course is found in her write-ups in terms of not only her books, but also her meta-analysis done with people like Ed Diener again, and Laura King, where they have a meta-analysis from the really first-class basic research in psychology in order to come up with these kinds of presentations, which I feel this positivity circle actually serves as a foundation for what I've tried to do in POB, positive organizational behavior. So she says that the research indicates that about half, give or take, of course, but in meta-analysis, indicating about half of where our happiness, where our positivity comes from, is both nature and nurture, not just genetics and genes and chromosomes, but also how we were raised as kids. So that's about where half of our positivity comes from. But look at this, that 10% piece is just, unbelievable, because of course this is what separates an evidence-based approach to what the research says. And the research says that circumstances matter, but not nearly as much as we give credit to it. So circumstances only represent about 10% of where our happiness, our positivity comes from. And all the studies that have been done in positive psychology, like Ed Diener's work on the role that money plays, for example, that lottery winners really aren't that much happier after several months, etc. Age doesn't really matter that much. Where we live doesn't really matter that much. And even how we look doesn't really matter that much. It matters, but not nearly what we give credit to it, or the person on the street gives credit to how come we're positive or not. So that 10% is huge, but here's what I really like. She has, summarized what the research indicates: about 40% of who we are in terms of our positivity, in terms of our happiness, in terms of who we are, in terms of our whole notion of what we can become, is self-determined. And that means, again, that this serves then that 40% piece, not as big as the 50%. And of course, that genetic component is merging, not getting any smaller by any means in terms of the research that's being done. But that this intentional piece serves then as the foundation for what I have been talking about in terms of psychological capital. It's our choices that make the difference. So the 40% intentions are the key. It's our positive mindset is who we are. We decide, we choose how we're going to determine who we are. So we're both products, the 50% of our set point, the 10% circumstances, and producers of who we are in terms of our positivity and happiness. So I love this, and I, of course, give Sonia much credit for putting this all together, but also all the research that's been done in positive psychology is really input into this, relatively easy to understand circle. So mindfulness is important, and Abe Lincoln, of course, is given credit maybe for more than he's actually said, but most of the people are about as happy as they make up their minds to be. That says a lot to me, because that's where mindfulness comes in, that's where the intention piece comes in, and we control our choices. I tell my grandkids this all the time. You can be influenced by what choices you make, but you control your choices. And of course, making the right choices, you choose to be mindful. And I like the work that Ellen Langner has done in the research. She's, of course, a Harvard psychologist. I've done programs with her over in China on her mindfulness work, and some of the research that she has is just wonderful if you haven't looked into what she's done. She actually is the first female that earned tenure in the psychology department at Harvard. So Ellen has done some wonderful research, along with, of course, many others in the mindfulness area. So let's get off now. We don't have that much time here, but I do want to at least give you that background to then talk about what I founded in what I called psychological capital. Okay? Now, I want to differentiate PsyCap, first of all, from the traditional types of capital, the resources that we, like in a business school here, that we're also concerned about. So the economic and financial capital is what we have. This is what the business school is based on, the finance people raising, capital, financial capital, economic capital, what you have. Now, of course, the human resource departments and the field of human resource management, they recognize human capital, and I love that and believe in human capital as well. What your staff knows, their experience, their education, all that good stuff. And then, of course, social capital, which is the whole social networking, of course, that is just taking off. A lot of good research going on in networking research, social networks that we have. And, of course, with the modern age that we live in, this is becoming more and more part of what, social capital means, how you get jobs, how you lose jobs, maybe through your social network. And then, of course, psychological capital. And I want to say that this is not just another buzzword, but actually means something different based on that intentions of who you are and who you can become. So that's what psychological capital is. And it's not saying that one flows to the other or something like that, but I just want to make sure that we understand what I mean by psychological capital. Now, this PsyCap, as I, have, labeled it to become, more easily branded and understood, is the hero within. Now, where does this come from? By meeting the scientific criteria, and I want to emphasize the scientific criteria. Why? Because I want to, again, make sure that we understand that PsyCap is based upon evidence, not just somebody's off the top of their head, what sounds good or what may work. This is based on scientific criteria. The criteria that I established from the beginning of PsyCap in 2001 was, number one, in order to be included in positive organizational behavior and PsyCap as I define it, is number one, it must have a theory and research foundation. Number two, it must have valid measurement, not just some measure that is out there on the internet, but has gone through the scientific process in the peer-reviewed journals of being a psychometrically reliable and valid measure. Number three, and here's what differentiates my approach from a lot of the others, including a lot of things in positive psychology, it must be open to development, meaning that it is not set. It is not set like a trait would be. It's not set like hardwiring would be from our neuro psychology types of variables, but that it is open to development, i.e. that it's a state rather than a trait. And then finally, because again, I'm in the business school, I have to show that it has desirable impact on attitudes, behaviors, and especially performance. So those are the criteria. Now, what positive psychology variables met those scientific criteria? Number one, HOPE did. Why? Because it met those 1, 2, 3, 4 criteria. And I follow the work of Rick Snyder's work on HOPE, where he said that HOPE is both the will and the way. And I followed him, was a good friend of his, and read all of his work. And of course, he passed a few years ago, which was very unfortunate because he wasn't that old. And he was down here in University of Kansas, just south of me. So we got to know each other very well, and I really follow his approach to HOPE and in what I talked about in my input into psychological capital. So HOPE was the first that met my criteria. Second was efficacy. And again, as I told you, I follow the work of Albert Bandura. He's my hero. He's my mentor. And of course, he had been doing some work on efficacy for many years, including some of the work that I have done with efficacy in the workplace. So efficacy is, one's confidence, and then resiliency, so important in these times. Bouncing back from adversity and beyond. I'm not just satisfied to getting back to the equilibrium or status quo. And again, I mostly follow the work of Ann Maston at the University of Minnesota, who had done a lot of work in developmental psychology, in clinical psychology, with especially at-risk youth. And I've taken some of her work in terms of both a theory background, but also then how she has applied that and developed resiliency in some of her work. And then finally, optimism. That also met the criteria, maybe not as well as the other three, but certainly a very important component because it met my 4 criteria. both the positive attributions that Seligman emphasizes in his, for example, his book, Learned Optimism. So again, it makes the point that optimism can be developed. And then, of course, the whole idea that it has future expectations. So, of course, what does that hope, efficacy, resiliency, and optimism, that acronym have? Stands for hero. And who bigger hero than I admire is Nelson Mandela. And I've done work in South Africa and have always felt that he has done the great leader of all time because, and I've actually have an article with my colleague Wayne Cassio on how that all has come about in terms of the hero within us, that HERO. So when you want to think about what's in PSYCAP, just remember the hero component, the hero acronym. Okay? Now, what PSYCAP is not, because of those scientific inclusion criteria again, it's not just the power of positive thinking that, of course, that I remember very well from Norman Vincent Peale days back in the 50s and 60s. It's not the best-selling books like 7 Habits, which has not gone through, in my opinion, the research process, or most of the other so-called airport books. And again, remember, I'm jealous because they make a lot of money, but not what I'm talking about. And then, of course, the hard wiring, which is way out on the extreme, which is difficult, but not impossible, as we're finding out, because of the elasticity that the brain may have, after all. But again, the genes, the talents, the intelligence, that's not developable as meeting that criteria. And the same is true for personality traits. I love the Big Five. For what? Prediction of selection purposes, not that we can develop Big Five. The same with strengths, the same with even the EI, emotional intelligence stuff. And then most of positive psychology that gets into, character traits and things like that. So these are some ways that we can, kind of define better what psychology is rather than, what it is not with these kinds of things. Excuse me. Now, besides the basic understanding of PSYCAP, we also have done our homework, meaning we've taken this basic research criteria to heart and have drawn from all kinds of studies and all kinds of real-world applications. Here is just a brief overview of some of the applications that we have that are resulted in, published in the scientific journal, mostly top-tier journals, things like from US, Asian, and European organizations. We've actually had 3,000 formal requests for our questionnaire that we have been validated in the published literature. This is both a 12-item version and a 24-item version. That means that there are no less than 33,000 studies going around the world. And it's very popular around the world in all countries, both in Asia, both in Europe, both in Central Asia, etc. So that's one thing that we have going for us, is that it's a very applicable tool that is now being used and can be gained free of charge for research at www.mindgarden, mindgarden.com. All you need to do is go to their website and get the instrument for free if you're using it for research purposes. We've done this with sales associates in all various kinds of organizations. We've done PSYCAP research with bank employees, with a big aerospace company. It's been one of our major laboratories for doing even experimental research at a big, aerospace company. We've done PSYCAP research with entrepreneurs and family businesses. We've done it with insurance services, so white collar as well as blue collar, aerospace kind of manufacturing. We've done it at the team level, and of course that's the direction we're moving. I'm working with, right now, her name is Julie Broad, who works for Booz Allen, that is assigned to the U.S. Army, and she and I are working together at the team level of PSYCAP. We have done it, of course, in all kinds of international firms, mostly in China, IT firms and logistics firms, but also have studies going on in Europe right now and, of course, across the globe. We've done it with restaurant chains. So we have tremendous success in the use of PsyCap, for example, of service employees, not only at the insurance white-collar level, but also in the huge restaurant industry. The higher the PsyCap, the better the service, the better the performance of the unit, etc. And then, of course, most of our research using a wide cross-section of firms. And we're also doing it, especially with my two sons, as I told you, Brett Luthans and Kyle Luthans, both professors of management, Kyle at the University of Nebraska at Kearney and Brett at Missouri Western University. They're doing work in both healthcare and especially education with students in PsyCap and the outcomes that they have concerning their performance, GPA, etc., and also things like their well-being. So that just gives you a broad view of all the applications that we're making. We do have the basic research in a meta-analysis conducted by my other close colleagues, James Avey, as I told you about before. And we have done a meta-analysis of 51 studies, over 12,000 subjects, where we've found that of these 51 independent studies, PsyCap is related to performance at an average of about 0.3. Now, I do emphasize 0.3. That is not 0.9, you understand. There's a lot of other things that go into performance beside the employee's PsyCap. But that 0.3 is about as good as it gets in the whole notion of psychological variables relating to hard measures of performance. And that performance ratings didn't matter whether they were self-ratings, supervisory evaluations of these employees, or objective data like sales. And then, of course, we found also that PsyCap relates to attitudes and behaviors. Desirable attitudes, undesirable attitudes, negative relationship. In other words, the higher the PsyCap, the lower the cynicism, the lower the turnover intentions, the lower the stress and anxiety. And, of course, PsyCap relates to desirable behaviors and undesirable behaviors. Now, most of this meta-analysis, of course, is correlational, but we also have causal evidence through experiments published in the literature, again, that can all be found in my book, Psychological Capital, and longitudinal studies, i.e. over time. And, of course, a lot of the research that I just went through is published with me involved and my doctoral students, but we also have many favorable outside reviews coming in. People like Alex Newman has published a very comprehensive analysis of PsyCap, published in 2014 in Journal of Organizational Behavior, and also another Australian professor by the name of Sarah Hawkins, who has also done a lot of work on the analytical side of PsyCap with favorable outcomes. So this is what we're saying. We're saying that PsyCap is state-like. Remember that criteria. It must be open to development and change, and it separates itself from the trait-like personality strengths and talents and the neurogenetic hardwiring stuff because it is open to development. So if you look at a continuum like this, see where we place PsyCap on the state side of the continuum of change and development. So it's not as fleeting as moods or emotions or feelings. It's kind of in between that and traits like personality and strengths, and of course then the outside of our hard wiring. So state-like is kind of visualized then where PsyCap fits in on the continuum of change and development, open to change and relatively sustained development. Now, why PsyCap development? Because again, it has impact, clearly indicating not only does PsyCap affect work attitudes, behaviors, and performance, but now we're moving into expanding it for health and relationships. Even the length of your life, again, I love the famous nun study that most of you are familiar with. The whole notion that, you can live longer if you have a positive outlook. And that nun study is just a great one. If you haven't, if you're not familiar with that, make sure you look that up. Just Google nun study and it'll come up. And then, of course, I use the triangle, the PsyCap triangle, for overall well-being. Now, the research behind this new thrust into relationships and well-being, we do have published again, and this particular article, we show that PsyCap relationships, which we have a measure of, relates to relationship satisfaction and to objective measures of things like how many hours people spend with their family and friends. So these are positive, statistically significant correlation between PsyCap relationships and people's satisfaction with the relationships. PsyCap relationships and how much time they spend with their family. The same is true for health. We have a measure of PsyCap health. This relationship shows that it relates to their health satisfaction, but also their BMI. The higher the PsyCap, the lower the body mass index, height and weight. And the same is true for their cholesterol level, a marker for, cardiovascular health. So the higher the PsyCap, the lower their reported cholesterol. So these are some, again, evidence-based approaches that PsyCap does relate to well-being. And I call it the PsyCap triangle of well-being. Again, the PsyCap work, which has been all this research we've done over the last, decade, but now with PsyCap relationships and PsyCap health. So one affects the other. And the whole idea is to keep a balance for all this good stuff. And if you don't, you can emphasize one over the other, but if you are missing any point on this triangle, then you don't have well-being. So we're really moving in that direction, and I'm actually lecturing to giving a presentation at the Harvard Medical School at the end of the month on the impact that this has on, for example, athletes and the relationships and health and their performance on the field. So we're spreading out and building out into all kinds of different areas. Now, let's see how we can develop PsyCap. And of course, I'm running out of time here, so I want to very quickly show you and give you, some ways in which we do the training. This is just for the efficacy component. But of course, we have the same kind of thing for developing the other parts of the HEROs. So the whole idea is that we do this in group training, and here's just an example of kind of how we actually conduct the training. The whole idea is that this is not rocket science, nor the secret, but just good group facilitation skills, common clinical psych practices aimed at developing the hero components. We've learned from Snyder, we've learned from Bandura, Maston, and Seligman of how to develop these components of hope, efficacy, resiliency, and optimism. So also some very tried and true positive psych exercises that most of you, of course, are familiar with. Gratitude letters, and then some of the exercises they use in terms of 3 genuinely positive experiences, and keeping a log on what we're grateful for. Sincerity is the core, and that then, of course, creates this what we're after contagion effect. And then, of course, the whole idea of my previous work on the very powerful role that positive social reinforcement, recognition, appreciation, and positive feedback can play in the development of one's PsyCap. So we have a lot of research going on in positive PsyCap development at all levels and for all lengths of time. We have experimental research where we've shown through control group design experiments that PsyCap can cause performance to improve. Not only can we show that we can develop PsyCap, but that we can show that that developed PsyCap leads to performance improvement. A lot of that work was done on this very project, the 787 Dreamliner. And you know that that's the biggest product that America has had in the last decade. And we were training the supervisors, training the engineers at that development of that project with, of course, the Dreamliner is just getting rave reviews. I've also put this into a utility analysis that the HR people use, and I'm not going to, of course, go through this line by line with you, other than to say these are real dollars on working on that 787, where we had 74 engineers who were taken off the job for a training program on SciCap, getting a dollar added, value added to put into an ROI, return on investment, of taking the revenue minus the cost, which was a very liberal cost of $20,000 to give that program to these engineers, over the cost. That's how the finance people calculate ROI, return on investment. Revenue minus cost over cost equals, in this case, a 270% return on investment. Now, where can we get that? And this is real dollars now. So, of course, that received all kinds of accolades of, wow, that got people's attention, where we can actually use this in SciCap development, return on that development, return on that capital of 270%. That got attention around the world. I like this one because this was actually given in Jakarta, in Indonesia, and I just happened to have Hero in the background of that building, of that billboard that I have giving a presentation in Jakarta. Here it is at the biggest marketing firm in Jakarta. This is in Beijing, China. Now, I can't read Chinese, but you can see underneath there, psychological capital, mastering the art of happiness. And of course, you can see, again, giving a talk and giving presentations and working with China Mobile. So, in winding up here then, what we have then is this evidence-based applications of SciCap. I'm very proud of the fact that we've been able to work SciCap into, for example, I'm working with NASA on the Mars mission. I told you about the Dreamliner. We're working in fast food. We're working with the U.S. Army with, again, PTSD. We're working with concussions and conduct of athletes at Harvard Medical School. We're working with Indonesian marketing firms, China Mobile, etc. So that's really taking off around the world, and some very impactful and I think exciting applications of SciCap. So in the world, not only in the US and Asia, but also in Europe and South Africa, here's just some of the examples of where I'm doing work in Norway, England, etc. And we feel very strongly that the future is open for a lot of development still. We're just scratching the surface, just have the foundation. Now we're again getting into other areas from positive organizational behavior. This just outlines some of that for you. And maybe you'll have some questions about that. And then finally, the roadmap for the future directions. We continue to build the theory. We take an inquiry, not an advocacy approach. That's very critical. We're still trying to find out more, trying to answer questions, not out there preaching that this is the only way. Alternatives to measures, we've developed some of those with our implicit measures, and how to develop SciCap, understand the complexity. We're getting at qualitative studies right now and mixed methods. We're using gaming and coaching through, again, some of the work that Julie Broad is doing with me, expanding to collective team and organizational SciCap, and any domain. You know, we're now in athletes. We're talking about NASA. We're talking about, you know, first responders. We're talking about SciCap in literally any domain, healthcare. And then, of course, we're rolling out our SciCap webinar series here in the U.S., around the world through I'm working with Human X Ventures and doing that. So here's an example of the 3-part series that we have coming up this summer. And now, where do we go from here? SciCap is a positive journey, not a destination. And to end, with our SciCap, we can be on top of the world, and may the SciCap force be with you. Thank you, and now let's open it up for questions. Thanks.
Yeah, that's great, Fred. That's awesome. And I love the ending with the force is with us.
Yes,
thank you.
The force is with us, especially after the latest Star Wars film came out.
Yeah, no kidding. Just really a wonderful presentation, and I think one of the points that I just wanted to make right at the beginning, as I'm thanking you here, is that there are two parts to this presentation that I just thought were incredibly powerful. Of course, SciCap, and we have questions already that have come in. Let me say that right for our members now. If you haven't yet submitted your question for Dr. Luthans, go ahead in the webinar control panel. There's a place for you to add your question. Send that in and let us know where you're dialing in from. We'd love to know where you are. We appreciate it. So back to the presentation, it was also really empowering to hear your history and your connection, how you brought things together, really bridging research and practice, and how you helped really launch, really a pioneer of launching positive psychology into the workplace. It was really great because it's empowering to all of us to recognize that you are like us, just with more experience, that we can push the frontiers, right?
Exactly. And I've also never claimed to be a genius, you understand. I've just planned on being strategic and working hard. And well, that's what I've done.
You have done that, and so we won't call you a genius, but we'll call you super smart. And more importantly,
I don't know about that even.
Well, you know what we'll do? Here's the fun thing. We're going to tie it right into a question about smarts and mindsets. We've got some questions in. Janet Edmonton, let me say that correctly, asked a great question right off the bat. When you were reviewing Hero, Fred, she had said, where do you put growth mindset regarding talent and intelligence to be able to develop? Where do you put growth mindset?
Yeah, I love growth mindset. The work of Carol Dweck has been doing is just wonderful. And then, of course, who you're going to have on next with Angela Duckworth, they're just wonderful constructs that I personally use in my presentations and so forth. But the key to that is there are other possibilities beside growth mindset, beside what is being done on, for example, grit. I love grit. But the key there is I still don't have the measures that I would like to have to my satisfaction, but I'm open to more constructs being added to psychological capital. And of course, anyone who's doing work in this field could do the same. I mean, they can add, I'm not saying that my HERO components are the exhaustive list. These are the ones that, though, do form the core and that we have the measure on and that have been shown to have the psychometric properties and the theoretical foundation. That's what I'm comfortable with at the present time. But that, for example, in my book, we have 2 chapters of these constructs that we also evaluate as being potentially part of PsyCap in the future.
That's great. Awesome. People are knocking down the door with questions. And Fred, I think we might have mentioned this at the beginning of the call. If the questions really came in, if you had a couple extra minutes to stay on the call for a bonus session, we might. Yeah. Okay. So let me just share that with everyone. This is being recorded. So if at the top of the hour you have to drop off the webinar, we completely understand. So you can get back to the recording. However, we will stay on for a few extra minutes to answer some of your questions. Yep. All right. See, I told you he was accessible when I first met him. Here he is.
I just took too long on my PowerPoint, but I appreciate
that's not what we say. That's not what we say.
Time.
Well, here's a great question from Andrew Soren. He asked if you, Fred, could explain PsyCap relationship and PsyCap health, actually, and what the relationship is, or rather, if you could explain PCR, as he refers to it, and PCH. And can you say more about how you train managers to increase PsyCap in teams?
Yes. Okay, both of those are good questions, and we're still in our infancy on developing both of those questions. The point is, though, that we recognize that we can develop one psychological capital. And by doing so, we can show and measure, and we have this in a published article in Journal Leadership and Organization Studies, where we are able to show that we can measure PsyCap relationships. And basically, it's the same questions that we use in the workplace. We just adapt the items, and then, of course, do the psychometric analysis that it's still reliable and valid, and can then predict those kinds of outcomes that I showed you in the slide. meaning that we can show that when people express, self-report, which of course is always a problem, and social desirability, which is also a problem, we try to get around those by controlling for that in terms of our measures that we use. But anyway, the point is that we are able to show that we can have the PsyCap relationships do relate to desirable outcomes in the relationship arena. The same is true for health. And of course, that has tremendous potential for the future. And that's what we're doing, because we think that that's, we've more or less been there, done that on work outcomes. Now we're trying to expand it into relationships and health to get at, my so-called PsyCap triangle of relationships, work, and health. All three of those must be considered and must be in balance in order to have well-being. So yes, we are developing those, and as far as the group notion of training, we are moving more and more toward the group level of analysis, and then eventually to the organizational level and even the community level. So we're able to do that in our training by simply, going from individual perspective, individual questions, individual examples that we use, to group examples and focusing in on that. And frankly, we're using that right now in some of the work that we're doing, as I told you, with Julie Broad in her work with the U.S. Army, and also on her dissertation that she's involved with, that I'm a member of her committee. So we're doing that right now as we speak, and hopefully that's the direction that we're moving.
That's awesome. You have a full plate. No
Sure
slowing
do.
down here. That's for sure.
Yep.
So here's a question that has been asked by a number of people and phrased really nicely by our producer of our series here, Jenny Brennan. She asked Fred, what advice would you give to practitioners like consultants, coaches, for how to develop and test interventions that help individuals increase PsyCap?
Yeah, and again, that's our whole aim. That's I'm scholar practitioner, remember, so I'm very concerned about how we do that, and of course welcome that with our practitioners. This is where the rubber meets the road, and I understand that. And of course, the whole idea is, as I said, this whole training is not rocket science. It's concentrating on each of the 4 components that have been done in clinical psychology, but applying the examples, applying the terminology, applying it to the workplace or to your specific, situation within that workplace. So the whole idea is that these interventions are not big deals, meaning that they're not, oh, you've got to do this for, a 6-week program and all that. No, you can do it in, we've shown we can develop PsyCap anywhere from an hour to 3 hours, workshops, for example. And each one of the components are, focused on. And for example, if you look at how efficacy is developed, there's a whole literature on that. We borrow from that in our developmental process that we use in developing PsyCap. My sons are doing this with students in the classroom very successfully and getting some good outcomes from this, both by showing they can develop PsyCap in a relatively short workshop setting, and that it has impact on outcomes that are desired at that particular situation.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Fred, real quick, just before we take a few extra questions in the bonus section here, I just wanted to ask, there are some folks who said if they wanted to get in touch with you, if you wanted just to say again the best way of contacting you.
Yeah, the best way of contacting me, of course, would be through email or through getting more depth in our webinar series that we're going to be holding this summer at this company I'm working with, Humanex. So this would be, I think, the best way to go about that. And I think that, again, we're not talking about this being expensive. And again, remember, as I started off by saying, I'm an academic, so of course I'm always open to questions, and I try to get back to you as soon as I can always. So
that's
just
great.
Go ahead and give me an email, fluthans@unl.edu.
Luthans@unl.edu.
.edu.
Edu. Perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for that. So we'll pepper you with a couple of questions just before we go here. A question comes in from Nuran Kormaz, and she asks a very interesting question. If in the study of PSYCAP, if you've seen any connection between PSYCAP and spirituality.
That's another good question, and we in the book again, and I urge you all to get the book because that's where the depth is on all the things that we talked about today. Is that we analyze spirituality, and of course that's very important to a lot of people. The reason I don't include it, and the reason I personally don't get too much involved with the research on it, is because again, I have problems with measurement. I have problems with development of it. So in the published literature, now again, I'm saying it's a very important construct. It's important that you look into that. Important that you use this within the whole domain of psychological capital as well. But I think again, as far as the research goes, it's just not quite rigorous enough for me at the present time. Now there's things being developed. I understand that, and it's showing up more and more in the published literature, and I hope that it is.
That's awesome. Gilbert asked a question. I'm going to bring them to you fast here. Gilbert asked if there's any work being done in Latin America.
Frankly, not as much as we'd like. We've done most of the work in Asia and Europe, South Africa, but not in Latin America. And I don't know the reason why, other than I hope that it does, occur, because there's a lot of opportunity there. And actually, I'm going to be going down there a year from now to Peru at a conference where I'll be giving a presentation in what is called the Pan-Pacific Conference in Lima next year. So I would like to see more come from that region of the world.
That's tremendous, and perfect that you'll be going down there.
Yeah,
which is super. One question goes back to the study of managers and what they do effectively, and versus the ones who are successful.
Right.
And wondering if you might comment on is the in terms of the research. Just there seems to be sometimes people say, I just don't network and I don't play the game because that's somehow not considered desirable. But in your research, you discovered that people were effective. There were effective managers, and then there was another subset of managers who were even possibly more. I guess they were more successful.
Right.
Did you see a way that it both can be done and they're not mutually exclusive? Was the question.
Yeah, that's a good question, and of course that's that research that a lot of people don't know that I've done. But that real managers piece that I told you about in that book. Now
right.
The key to that was that it kind of pointed out the realities, which is also a problem. That a lot of the people who are moving up the ladder are not necessarily effective, meaning that they play the game well, but they do not have, for example, the support of their direct reports. They don't have a good relationship in terms of the human side of things with their people, but yet they play the game very well. And I pointed that out in this again, qualitative study that we did with direct observation, and it was really kind of an eye-opener that successful people are not necessarily, now they can be, and of course that's the ideal, but unfortunately not always the case, that successful people are not necessarily the effective people in terms of relating to their people, but also in terms of getting the job done, which of course is a big problem out there in the real world.
Yeah, right. That it seems to be. You've surely got to be effective, and you need to know how to get things done.
Exactly.
Just again.
But also we found that they're not always the ones that are promoted.
Isn't that interesting?
We define success as level over tenure. How fast they rise in organizations are the ones that network the best, not necessarily the ones that are getting the job done the best.
Yeah, we've got to help. We got to help these folks get the due recognition that they deserve.
Exactly.
Right? Oh, that's fantastic. Another question related to if you could talk a little bit more about how PsyCap leads to better interpersonal relationships in the workplace, sort of related to that question.
Yeah, and of course, again, these are some of the complexities and dynamics. And again, remember when I said PsyCap related to these outcomes like relationships and interrelationships and all, there's a lot of things that go into that. Mm-hmm. But importantly, a statistically significant, i.e. better than chance alone, impact is their psychological capital. And the higher the PsyCap, and again, positivity breeds positivity. It's the whole contagion effect, which we have some articles on that actually use empirical research data that indicate if a person is positive, then their subordinates tend to be positive. Now, we all know that kind of as a truism and in the way in which we handle things, but the key is we have research that supports that. But there are obviously a lot of things that go into that, not just PsyCap. And I don't want to leave the impression that PsyCap is the answer. It's an answer that has just too much good research behind it that we can't ignore it.
Right, an answer and a good one.
Exactly. That's what I think.
Yeah,
and that's what we've shown.
Yeah, and that's what we're looking for, are evidence-based,
Exactly.
practices ultimately that we can take to the market, the marketplace.
Just like the medical school, we have to have evidence-based in order to really move ahead because we've had too much of the other.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Mark Liston references, or at one point you had mentioned strengths in the conversation around connected to hero, but he wanted just to see if you could speak to how strengths work is related and or is quite distinct from PsyCap.
Yeah, and strengths, of course, is a very powerful construct. Again, as I said, that's what the Gallup organization is based on. A lot of their work is on strengths.
Right.
I don't include it because, again, you can't develop strengths. You can place and fit strengths, to the situations, and that's, of course, what we try to do. But the key here is that we can't develop strengths, even though we may be able to measure them. We can't really develop them to the point where I feel that it's an important part. You remember on the continuum, they're linked in there with personality traits and things like that, not open to development like the HERO components are.
Yeah, right. Okay, that's very helpful. And we have a question in from Germany. Claudia Harser asked the question.
By the way, that's my heritage, German. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, well, look at that, Claudia. This is time to celebrate. Yeah, that's awesome. Where in Germany, do you know? We're just maybe Claudia
Northern Germany. Hamburg and Schleswig-Holstein, or my grandparents were all born there. So.
Oh, that's great. Claudia, you heard that. Claudia asks a fairly detailed question. If you could explain a little bit more about the calculation from the correlation between PsyCap and performance to the monetary benefit of PayCap in a little more detail.
Yeah, of course, that's in that slide with utility analysis.
Yes.
So what we found is that we actually show that the increase in their psychological capital by attending our workshop resulted or caused the improvement in performance to the tune in that particular slide of, I think it was $73,000 of actual dollar improvement in productivity and performance. When we take that, we stick it into these utility formulas that can be found in, like my friend Wayne Cassio, again, has a whole book on utility analysis where we can actually plug in the revenues and the costs in order to get a return on that development. And that's what we did. And of course, again, like my finance colleagues here, my finance professor colleagues, they say, well, Fred, you make some robust assumptions. And my response to that is, you don't, because they, of course, make robust assumptions also in terms of what kind of depreciation they use, etc. So yes, there are some assumptions that we make, but these utility formulas are pretty well accepted in terms of actually making a statement about dollar impact, and that's what, of course, we must bring to the table of our companies and our organizations, that we can actually show a tangible, in this case, dollar impact on outcomes, and that way we can be part of the conversation that goes on in organizations today.
Nice.
As we're with armed with dollars and cents, return on investment kinds of ammunition.
Yeah, absolutely. With my background in corporate America, boy, you really want to be able to speak to that. And so any of us on the call right now, if we learn that lesson alone today, that would be a real good one.
Exactly.
So questions keep coming in, but let me just sort of close with one, maybe two, and then that will be it.
That's fine.
Yeah, we always have interested. Our members are very curious and very dedicated.
Well, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but the point is that we're all in this together, and let's go out together.
Yeah, that's what's so empowering about your presentation today and what you've been speaking of. There's some interest in Gretchen Spreitzer's work on thriving.
I'm interested in it too, and know her very well. Good close friend.
Oh, great.
Of mine.
And the question that came in from Ron Levine is if you had any thoughts of the relationship potentially between the two, or once again an opportunity.
Yeah, actually, we have an article that came out in Journal of Organizational Behavior on the role that PsyCap plays in her construct of thriving. So we have shown that PsyCap is related and can be used in the construct that she mostly talks about, which is thriving, and her earlier work on empowerment. So we're very familiar with that, and of course feel very closely to them. And the same is true for all the Michigan approach. Jane Dutton, Kim Cameron, Bob Quinn, and Gretchen Spreitzer are doing some wonderful work. And I've been together with them from the beginning, and we're very close on that. So I'm not trying to any way compete or trying to say that mine over theirs or something like that. I'm saying that what we're doing is supplemental to what they're doing. And we tend to be, again, more at the micro level, and they're more at the organizational macro level. But the key is that we now are trying to move in that direction. And of course, they have studies that move in my direction. So we're in this together, and, it's not a matter of, competing or something like that. So I love her work on thriving. And like I said, one of our very latest articles incorporates that.
Yeah, just what you just spoke to is why the International Positive Psychology Association was formed, was that we need that coordination that you're speaking of, and the teamwork.
Agree.
Yeah, the collegiality is really quite beautiful in our field.
I love it, and I love that what IPPA is doing, and I'm encouraging you all to be active participants as you continue, because this is our professional association, no doubt about it, and they're doing a wonderful job.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Here's the last question. I think, again, this is more aspirational for another study potentially. Doug Gray asked a great question about PsyCap, any studies that look at the PsyCap of actual practitioners, such as executive coaches, in relation to their ability to coach clients?
That's a good one.
Yeah, isn't it?
And the answer is no, not really. That, but of course, that's what we should be looking at. And I think that, the same with professors or anything else. I personally feel that that's needed, and we're doing a lot of that, more that we're trying to apply not only in these workshops, the development of PsyCap, but then how do we get sustainability? And that comes from the coaching, that comes from the gaming technology that we're looking into and developing right now as we speak, for sustainability of this over time. So we do have some studies that show that, once we go through our PsyCap training and development programs, it does last, up to 3 months after, things like that. But we do need some sustainability interventions as well. And that's where I see coaching coming in, and that's where I see gaming technology coming in. Okay?
Oh, that's great. Well, it turns out that actually is Doug Gray's dissertation topic, as I've just learned. So,
great.
Go Doug, go! Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Let me know
great.
what you find out. Let me know. Keep me informed.
Yeah, that's a great way to close up the Q&A. Well, you get extra stars, Fred, for giving a full presentation plus David. The extra time here.
I really appreciate that. I can stay on here as long as you need me, but I also appreciate the realities here of everybody's schedule. So I really mean this. You've been a wonderful host, and I admire your work as well. And let's all keep this in, keep it all in the family, as I started off saying. I believe in family, and I know you do as well. So let's really have a good time and have fun doing it, and make a contribution and make a difference.
Yeah, what a wonderful way to wrap up. And I'll just, in addition to being so grateful that Dr. Luthans, Fred, was here with us today, I just want to thank Jenny Brennan, our producer, who makes this series possible with all of her work behind the scenes. Our Sydney Rubin is our technological director, and she is fantastic as well, social media as well.
Both helped me a lot on this. I want to thank them as well. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, that's great. You guys were great partners, that's for sure. And then you, of course, know these two folks I'll recognize, James Pawelski, our executive director, and our president, Barbara Fredrickson, who, again, without their support, we wouldn't have this series, which is coming up on almost 10 years. So I'll just say to everyone, thank you again for joining us. Thank you for being a part of the International Positive Psychology Association. Look for an announcement soon for the recording will be placed in our archive soon. I'm David J. Paulé, and wherever you are in the world, make it a great day or night. All the best, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks again.